G'day viewers, just a bit of a chat about the Feronia string inverters. To give you a bit of an idea of who Feronius are, I think they're 80 or 90 year old company, and so they're Austrian based, still owned, privately owned in Austria, so they're not even listed. So they've got an enormously long pedigree, and they've always done things with electricity. So they originally started out making transformers. And then after making transformers, probably what they're most well known for before the solar industry boom is actually making welders. So they're one of the best welding makers in the world to make normal, when I say welding like steel welders, so like MIG and TIG style welders. So they're a world leader in that. And when we're welding steel, we're using AC electricity to make DC, and then that's what's melting the metal together for the welding mechanism. So it sort of makes sense that these guys already know a lot about what to do with transforming electricity from AC to DC. But what we're doing with solar is actually doing the reverse. What we're doing is actually we're transforming DC electricity from the roof, being the solar panels, back to AC electricity for us to then use in our home. So we're calling that, you could, it's bi-directional. We're going from AC to DC or DC back to AC. So Feronius's pedigree, they already knew a lot about doing this, and probably I think a lot of the parts that have on the shelf to make their welders would have still made their first inverters, their crossover pieces. So my favourite things about this is really the only inverter, if we do string systems, that we want to use. They're made in the EU, they're still made in Austria. If you pick this unit up compared to most other units, this unit is so much heavier than everyone else's. So if you're buying by weight, we're getting a lot more, and also a lot more robust, just with everything that's in it. These aluminium case, not plastic. They're really robust, made to be installed outside, still can be installed in a garage. The Australian solar industry really, let's say the people with a lot of pride in what they want to install, if they're installing solar inverters, DC ones, that is, strings, then this is really probably the mainstay of all the boys and girls that are trying to do a really good job. If they're doing string systems, this is the thing to aim for. Other brands, they're, as I said, if you pick them up, they're really lightweight. A few of them have been around, got a little bit of a pedigree, but no one has got the pedigree of years involved with the Feronius. The Feronius still can also, it's still quite a clever inverter, so we can still monitor this. It gets connected to your internet, and yourselves as consumers and us as installers, we can log in and see what's going on. It does give us a little bit of a breakdown in, typically we normally wire 2 circuits of panels to the roof, and often they end up being, usually by default, you might have a 20 panel system and have 10 panels in one string and 10 in another. So when we're logging on, we can get a bit of information out of this and compare those two, and if something wasn't quite right on one of those strings, and assuming they both pointed the same direction and had the same amount of panels, we can determine that there's something wrong with one of them and there's something to look at. That doesn't tell us which panel might have an issue or which joint or something like that up on the roof, and that might mean we have to undo and take 10 panels off the roof to find a problem. But we at least can usually halve halve where the problem might be from one or the other. So with strings, this is definitely the number one, and everything else is a distant 2, 3 or 4. So stepping up from the Feronius string inverter, the next level of cleverness up is a system that has what's called voltage optimizers. So this is the brand of this unit here is Solar Edge. So they're we're an Israeli company, and they're listed on the US stock exchange. So that's their pedigree. So they're a listed company. So the difference, how we differ here, we're a system that's halfway between a string system and halfway between microinverters. So we still have a big box on the wall downstairs somewhere that can be. This is also weatherproof. It could go in the garage. It can go outside and get wet. So it's also made of metal. It's a robust construction as well, so gets a big tick in the box, the inverter part of it as well. So how this differs a bit from the Fronius, there's two things an inverter does. An inverter makes the DC to AC, but it also has what's called a power point tracker, which is optimising the energy it's getting out of the solar panels. So the Fronius does all of that in the one box. How the Solar Edge differs is they separate part of the energy conversion out to be another little box, and this goes behind each panel up on the roof. What's clever about this though is each one of these can also let us visualise what's happening with every panel on the roof. So as well as helping optimise, and that's what's called a voltage optimiser. So if we had 10 panels in a row with 10 voltage optimisers, one typically goes on the back of each panel, then these help tune every panel, if you like, to each panel to do its best job. And then they all still join together like batteries end to end, the 10 panels, via the voltage optimiser here, and then this comes back to the big box inverter, which then makes the DC back to AC so that we can use it. This has some safety advantages over a string system, in that if there's no power in the street, the power goes out. All the solar panels for a string system, they're all still making electricity, and it just sits there ready to use. So they'll be making, could be 300, 400, 500 or 600 volts of electricity on the roof. Whereas the extra bit of safety the Solar Edge makes is that if there's no power in the street, the inverter loses power, then all the panels only default back to the DC power each panel can make, which is about 40 volts, which is a very, very, very safe voltage. Like the Fronius, this is also generally connected to the internet, and yourselves as consumers and us as installers, we can look and it'll tell us how much electricity it's making, what's going on, and this one here, cleverly, we can see every panel what it's doing. So if something wasn't quite right, we'd know of, again, I'll use the example of 20 panels on the roof. We'd know exactly which panel had a problem, so if we had to come and have a look at it, then you'd know exactly which one to undo and look under. You wouldn't have to undo 20 panels to try and find a problem. So it's nice and clever. All of these three manufacturers, Fronius, Solar Edge and Enphase, all have very good visual graphs to look at either on your app or your computer to see what's going on. So they've all done a good job with those. So I think they've been around, I think it's in late 2006, 7 or 8 from memory. So let's say they've probably got a 15-year pedigree or thereabouts is their lineage. And finally, on to my favourite way to convert solar into usable electricity. So this is what we call a micro inverter made by Enphase. Enphase is an American listed company. Fairly sure, probably about the same 15-year mark or thereabouts as Solar Edge. So American company based, listed on the American Stock Exchange. This is their 7th generation. It's called an IQ7 of micro inverters. So they're just each couple of years they revise and make them stronger and more durable and cleverer. And so each one of these, there's one of these behind every panel. And again, I'll stay with the 20 panel for example. So 20 panels would need 20 micro inverters, one of these behind each one. So what happens, a quick explanation, is all of the power conversion's done in this micro inverter. So the panel plugs into these special plugs here. So the panels are typically around 40 volts, for example, and then that puts 40 volts DC into this box here. And then this then makes the 40 volts DC into 240 volts AC, and then it goes along this black normal sort of cable that we use as electricians. The clever bits, what I like about this are, all of this wiring up to here is only 240 volts AC electricity, so that's what we normally use it's what we always use in everyone's house. This is protected by safety switches and circuit breakers. So if there was any physical damage done to the cable by varmints or mechanical damage by a demolition or something like that, then we've got the safety of safety switches and circuit breakers. So the risk of fire and overload is virtually eliminated. Each of these also has its own IP address, so when we log on to look at what's going on, every panel has its own, or every microinverter has its own address, and we map those out when we do an installation about their position on the roof. And then what happens then is if something was underperforming, we know exactly which panel it is underperforming. We could actually work out exactly when did that happen to within 15 minutes on what day by just looking back through the data, like really clever. The other, like the real plus advantages of this also are that, again, every panel is an independent power source. So that if shading was on a roof, was a chimney or a TV aerial that in a certain part of the day started to shade a panel, then only that panel's affected. Whereas if we go back to the string system with the Fronius, once you start to affect one panel, with the Fronius, if 10 panels are in a row, once we affect the first panel, the rest of those 10 are affected about how much power they make. So, like, it's clever. It's safe is its biggest part. And ongoing in the future, then also what happens is if you wanted to expand the system, and let's say someone only wanted to put on 2 panels for some reason. Typically, it'd be difficult to add 2 panels on to one of the other systems, because normally you're trying to make the panels match the existing ones that are there. And every 6 months, every manufacturer then advances to their next level of panel, which makes a bit more electricity and it's a bit different shape and so forth as well. So adding into other systems can be challenging or sometimes impossible or not worthwhile. Because the panels don't match. Whereas with microinverters, we could have a different brand panel or a panel that's far more powerful added on to the system next door to it, and we only need to add like one microinverter to the back of each panel, and we don't have to worry about those matching. Let's say, for example, in the future, if there was a panel change, as I said, or a panel failed, then again, to find one that matches to an existing one where you've got 10 in a row could be a very difficult situation. Whereas this is basically future proofing. If things get changed, then we can, if the panel manufacturer had changed dramatically, we can still make it work with microinverters. So the safety is number one. This other box we just got here, this is the bits where the microinverter reports back to, and this is what plugs into your internet. So we normally put these in either, if you've got a large switchboard, we'll put it inside that already, or typically we normally put our own little solar switchboard next to your existing board, and it has these boxes in it, and this is called an Envoy. So Enphase is the brand, and they call this an Envoy. So it connects to the internet and the cloud, and that's what lets us see how much energy we're using, how much we're making, and then individually look at every panel and see what's going on from there. So Enphase also have a 10-year warranty on a standard from their microinverters, and we can actually pay within the first 6 months. You can actually they've got a warranty extension program, so we can pay an extra fee and extend the warranty of those out to be a full 25 years, which is a big number. So that's probably all I can add to those. Again, these are my favourite. I've got these at my parents' place. I've got these at home. Most friends and family that trust my guidance on what my learnings are and what I choose for my family is the standout choice for myself and my friends. Cheers.